The agenda for the things that we're going to cover today will be the recovery options around backing up your devices and your network configuration and your switching hardware. Networks and network infrastructure and switching, it is the backbone of what makes our facilities operate. So without that, we're really going to be dead in the water. We're not going to be able to do anything. I think it's pretty self-explanatory as why do we need that? It's because we want to be able to get the system back up and running quickly. And this example is, this is why you need disaster recovery. It's this little girl that just set her parents' house on fire, and hopefully they have insurance and can recover. But how long does it take to recover from rebuilding a house? I was just talking to Wayne about that. We're going through that now, building a new house, and you're talking about a year. But hopefully it doesn't take a year to replace your networking switches. Hopefully it only takes you a few minutes, but that is the challenge. And so 4 methods that we're primarily going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Device Manager, which is the simplest form. It also doesn't necessarily cost anything. I would say the majority of customers that I work with aren't IT people, so they're not familiar with command line interface. They like the web interface. The web interface is a little bit more friendly for them. They don't need to know the syntax or anything like that to use it. And so, the simplest form is for sure the web page. The next option down would be CIP Protocol, AOP. How many know what that means? So CIP stands for Common Industrial Protocol. That's just a communication protocol that's layered on top of Ethernet IP. And then the last one there is AOP. AOP, it means add-on profile. And so when you right-click in Studio 5000, we're talking about the development environment for the controllers. So when you right-click in Studio 5000 and you add a new device to the tree, that GUI that gets launched, that graphical user interface that gets launched, that is what we call the AOP. It's the add-on profile. So it has all the information about the device that you're adding. It has the input and the output data. It has all the class instance and attribute information that the controller is going to use to access that device. And so it just gives you a nice configuration environment to build that. And so when we talk about CIP protocol or AOP, that's really what we're talking about, right-clicking and adding that static switch into the configuration of your controller. And next, the next ones we'll talk about there, anything below the blue line is a cost. There's a cost associated with that. So everything we talked about so far are free. So the next one down will be the Cisco Catalyst Center. If you guys have been around for a while, you may remember that as Cisco DNA. So that's Cisco's switch management software solution. It is a subscription-based, which most software developers or software vendors, have an option for subscription. But with Cisco, it's subscription only for that solution. And then the next one we'll talk about is FactoryTalk AssetCentre. So Device Manager is a configuration, and we're specifically going to talk about backup and recovery. But for Device Manager, there is an option there for backup and restore. And so you can copy a file from a device, and that's this section here. So where we're going to copy it from, to device or from device, the file type, whether it's a configuration file, and then the transfer mode type. And there's different transfer mode types that you can select there in that drop down. There's TFTP, there is SFTP, FTP, or HTTP. So those are the protocols that you can utilize. You can back up the existing configuration to flash as well, if you want to store it there on flash. And then of course the server details, that will be where the files are hosted. And so you put your IP address in there, and then the file path for where that file is going to be stored. And then lastly, the file name. And so when you do from device, there it will take the file, it'll take the running config and the startup config from that switch and put it over there on that server via the protocol that you selected to the destination of the application server that you have there in those fields. And so when you restore a switch, then you can pull it from there to device, and it will overwrite what's there on that switch configuration. You reboot the switch, and then you're back up and running. So it's very easy to do that from the Device Manager configuration. A lot of customers utilize this way. The only thing, in my opinion, the concern would be is that wherever these backups are going to is somewhere that's protected, that no one's going to go in and blow those away. or whenever we rebuild an image, if they're sitting on a virtual stack or something like that, that you don't lose that. So one additional thing on the new OSs, you can do command line interface within the device manager piece now. So we did expand some of that. And so you can do show running config, and that's actually what's done here. As you can see the running config and the settings that are there in the configuration. If you like command line interface, then that gives you some exposure to do that from within the device manager. Next is the Stratix AOP. Again, the AOP add-on profile that I talked about earlier. So this gives you the ability to add a switch configuration into your controller configuration. And so one good thing about this, which a lot of customers like, is that they're only really backing up one thing. They're backing up the configuration for their controller, and most customers are really good about that. Maybe not so good about backing up their drives and some of that other peripheral stuff, but they're really good about backing up their controllers. And so this gives you the ability to back up one file and save that one file somewhere, and it has the switch configuration saved in there. So what do you think the downside of doing it this way is? It takes a connection in the PLC. That's the downside. And most customers, that's usually not an issue, but believe it or not, I do have some customers that is an issue. And so even though that some of these controllers can support up to 500 nodes or devices configured there in the tree, they are exceeding that, and it's becoming an issue for them. And so that's probably the biggest downside to doing that, other than managing firmware and ensuring the firmware matches and stuff like that as you have that configured in the controller. So some things do need to match. That would be the only caveat that I would say about adding it into the controller project. So outside of that, you won't get all the configuration of the switch that's exposed to you, but you do get a lot of things that are exposed to you. Whatever you have configured is what you have configured. Now, you can do some port configuration and some things in there. I'm not sure if you can totally, I haven't looked at the table recently about what the AOP allows and what it doesn't allow. At one time we had a limited AOP and a full AOP, and we also had a table of what each one would allow you to do and wouldn't allow you to do. I'm not sure if you can do like access control list and all those things within this environment, or you need to go into device manager or to command line interface to do that. But yeah, if you get access to, that's probably the other downside too, if you get access to that file and you have access to the controller, then that doesn't, of course, create an inherent security risk. But hopefully, anyone that's kind of talks about security will also talk about another thing as LOPA, layers of protection. And so you want to make sure panels are locked. You also want to make sure things are password protected. And so if they do get physical access, there's a couple of other barriers that they need to go through to be able to really create a vulnerability. So the AOP does allow you to add the switch configuration there. And of course, when you back up the ACD file, the project file for that controller, then you have a backup of this configuration. And so you also have the option of saving and restoring there too. And so that gives you access to that. Moving out to the things that you're paying for. So this is the Catalyst Center, what was previously known as Cisco DNA. So Cisco DNA is a network management and automation platform that offers a single dashboard for managing Cisco Catalyst switches. It enables automation, so being able to add and provision new switching hardware and configuring new switching hardware there on the fly. It also helps you do zero trust configuration around your network, so the security model and being able to monitor the security and so forth, what's transpiring out there on the network between the switching hardware and so forth. It can automate tasks like provisioning, configuration, software updates. Let's see. Using AI, it also has an AI component to analyze traffic network patterns. So if it starts to see something that's unusual, some traffic that's unusual, that's not atypical for what it's been seeing, then it will flag that for you. And so that could be pretty useful if you have a virus that starts up on a machine and starts communicating out the network, trying to collect information. It's good to flag something like that. We call that real-time data access and monitoring. And of course, it helps configure with trust security policies between point-to-point devices and so forth. So what devices am I allowing to talk to other devices and so forth? It allows you to do that as well. All right, so moving out from Cisco, the next option from Rockwell Automation is something called AssetCentre. And I kind of didn't expand much on AssetCentre on the earlier slide because AssetCentre does a lot of things. So how many people have experience with AssetCentre? Perfect. All right, so AssetCentre is Rockwell Automation's, obviously, asset management solution. And so when we talk about assets can mean many different things. Switching and switch hardware, of course, is an asset in our industrial control systems, but so are controllers, so are variable speed drives, I/O devices and things like that. Those are all what we would consider to be assets. And so what AssetCentre does is it allows you to back up configurations of those devices. It also allows you to back up documents. It could be Word documents, it could be Excel documents, and it could be ACD files. So it allows you to back up all those different things. AssetCentre is built on top of a SQL database. So SQL is where it resides. And it also allows you to do automated disaster recovery. So occasionally it will go out and it will interrogate controllers and get the latest version from them. And it does that on an interval that you specify. And it will do a comparison against the version that you have pinned is what we would call the primary version against what it finds out in the facility that's currently running. And if there's any deviations, it will notify you of those deviations. And then there's also a function that we added into the controllers, and I think it goes back to L6s. I don't think it goes back to anything earlier than that. But it does need to be firmware version 21 or higher. But the controllers can notify the AssetCentre server if there's a change, and we call that the controller-based change detection. And so the controller, if someone gets access to the controller that's unauthorized, obviously if you didn't have passwords or anything like that, they get access to it, they go online, they upload from that controller, manipulate a change. We would like to be notified on that ASAP. And so if you have change detection turned on in the controller, it will notify the AssetCentre server that there was a change. It'll send it out to everyone subscribing to that email list. And then, of course, you can go effectively figure out what happened. Who's doing this? Is it someone roguely accessing the system and so forth? So that goes back to our statement earlier around different layers of protection. That would be one layer of protection in the controller for that. So the other piece with AssetCentre, specifically talking about things that it can back up static switches. So you can store your static switch configuration there in AssetCentre, and you can recover your switching hardware from within AssetCentre. This gives you an overview of the comparison tools for AssetCentre, and this is if you do an audit and you find what was a configuration, we're comparing it to another configuration, it'll show you the differences between the two. And there's also comparison tools built in there for other assets like Studio 5000, for example. If we got two files there, a file that we called revision 3 and a file that's our current running revision that could be revision 4, then you can see the differences between those two revisions. So if someone made a change last night, we want to kind of see what they really changed. We didn't get to talk to them that was off-shift person, then we can do a compare and see exactly what the changes were. And so there's many different options around comparisons between different versions.